I need those Nevada certificates renewed today, not next month. I snapped into the phone, rubbing my temples as the third state regulator in 2 hours put me on hold again. The fluorescent lights above my desk hummed like a migraine, and the coffee in the break room tasted like someone had dissolved cardboard in it. It was Monday, 8:47 a.m., and I was already juggling 6 jurisdictions, 3 pending audits, and 1 junior analyst who thought FDIC stood for Federal Department of Internet Commerce. My name's Andrew Patterson, but everyone calls me Andy. I'm 49, and I've been doing regulatory compliance for 15 years. Started late, spent my early career as an engineer before switching to finance, then found my calling in compliance. Not the glamorous side of the business, but somebody's got to make sure we don't end up in federal prison. The hold music cut off. Mr. Patterson, this is Sandra from Nevada Banking. Your renewal application shows incomplete signatory documentation. I pulled up the file on my second monitor. Sandra, hi. The delay's on our end. We're updating our corporate structure. Can you give me until Thursday? Absolutely. You've never missed a deadline in 8 years. Take the time you need. That's the thing about this business. Relationships matter. Sandra knew I'd been filing Nevada paperwork since she was a junior clerk. When other companies got hit with fines and delays, we sailed through because I'd spent years earning trust, one phone call at a time. Then I heard it. That voice that made my jaw clench every single morning. Andy still wrestling with the red tape, I see. Brandon Wells strutted past my cubicle, sipping some overpriced coffee with oat milk and superiority. His teeth flashed like a Dollar Tree movie star as he adjusted his designer glasses. You know, AI's going to replace that whole department in about 5 minutes. Compliance is so last decade. I looked up from my screen where I was cross-referencing renewal schedules for our Texas, Florida, and Arizona licenses against the upcoming $750 million Series C investor review. And yet here I am, making sure you don't lose your operating authority for a paperwork error, I said flatly. Brandon didn't really hear me. He never did. At 27, with his Stanford MBA and 0 days of actual compliance experience, he saw me as some relic from the fax machine era. His Uncle Charlie had hired him straight out of business school, and Brandon treated the place like his personal playground for disruption theories. What Brandon didn't see was the 15 years I'd spent building relationships with state regulators, the late nights preventing million-dollar fines, or the fact that every single license we held had my name on it. Not his, not even his Uncle Charlie's. Mine. Hey, remember that little hiccup we had with Colorado 3 years ago? I called after him. Brandon turned, confused. What hiccup? The one where they tried to fine us $8.2 million for improper loan disclosures. The one where I caught the error at 2 a.m. on a Sunday and filed emergency corrections before the Monday deadline. Saved the whole company. His blank stare told me everything. He'd never even heard about it. That crisis happened before his time, and apparently Uncle Charlie hadn't bothered filling him in on how close they'd come to bankruptcy. Right, he said vaguely. Well, that's exactly my point. Automation would catch those errors before they happen. Brandon disappeared into the glass conference room where he liked to draw flowcharts about synergy and digital transformation. I turned back to my work, logging into the Colorado Division of Banking portal. Ironic that I was updating the very licenses that had almost killed us 3 years ago. The morning flew by in a blur of regulatory portals and deadline tracking. Kevin Taylor, our new intern, leaned into my cubicle around 10:30. Kid was sharp, reminded me of myself at that age, eager but drowning in the complexity. Hey, Andy, I'm trying to understand the Arizona filing requirements. If our principal changes, do we need to refile the surety bond? Good question. Yes, but only if the bondholder changes. In our case, all the bonds are tied to my personal credentials, so changes in corporate structure don't affect them. Kevin nodded, taking notes. What happens if someone else needs to take over the bonds? I paused, really looking at him. They'd have to apply for new bonds, get credentialed through each state individually, pass background checks, and demonstrate 3 years of compliance experience. The whole process takes 6 to 9 months, assuming no complications. And if something happened to you before then we'd be operating without proper authority, which means immediate suspension of interstate activities. I kept my voice casual, but Kevin was asking exactly the right questions. The kid understood what most executives never bothered to learn. My phone buzzed with a Slack notification. Brandon had posted another meme, this time a picture of a dinosaur with the caption, "Andy's compliance methods be like, Ray Dewar means I love bureaucracy." 3 laughing emojis from various brown nosers, including one from Jason Stone, our CFO, who really should have known better. I didn't get angry anymore. After 15 years here, outrage was a luxury I couldn't afford. But I did make a mental note to update my emergency protocols file when I got home, just in case. The truth was, I'd been feeling the shift for months. Brandon's constant comments about automation and modernization weren't random jokes, they were trial balloons. He was building a case for something, and that something probably involved my job. What he didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this possibility since day one. Every contract, every relationship, every piece of institutional knowledge I'd built over 15 years was documented and secured. Not in company files, but in my personal systems, because in compliance, you learn early. Always have a backup plan. The afternoon brought its usual chaos. California sent a routine audit request. Nothing serious, just annual verification. Texas needed updated contact information. Arizona flagged a technical question about cryptocurrency reporting that would take me 3 days to research properly. Brandon walked by again around 3 p.m., this time with a clipboard and that particular smile that usually meant trouble. "Andy, got a minute?" Quick sync about operational efficiency. I saved my work, followed him to a small meeting room, the same room where 3 years ago I'd broken the news about the Colorado crisis to a room full of panicked executives. Funny how history rhymes. The meeting invite came Tuesday morning like a digital pink slip. Quick sync. Operational realignment from Nicole Harper in HR, scheduled for 11:17 a.m., not 11:15, not 11:30, 11:17. That kind of weird precision usually meant someone was about to get fired, and they wanted it to look spontaneous. I'd seen this dance before. The oddly specific time, the vague subject line, the HR person who'd never spoken to you suddenly taking interest in your calendar. I clicked accept and started mentally preparing. By 11:15, I was sitting in the small conference room near Charlie's office, the one that always smelled like dry erase markers and someone's questionable lunch choices from 1987. The air had that pre-execution tension you only get in corporate America. Charlie Wells sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who'd rather be getting a root canal. At 58, he'd built TechFlow from nothing, but somewhere along the way, he'd stopped making hard decisions and started delegating them to his nephew. Today, that delegation was about to cost him everything. Brandon lounged across from Charlie with the smug confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. His designer polo shirt and perfectly styled hair screamed, "I've never been in a real fight." Nicole Harper clutched her clipboard like a life preserver, nervous energy radiating off her in waves. "Andy," Charlie started, reading from what was obviously a script. His voice had all the authenticity of a hostage video. "We're conducting a comprehensive review of operational redundancies and strategic alignment with future objectives." Future objectives. Corporate speak for, we're about to do something stupid. Effective immediately, Brandon jumped in, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "We're transitioning to agile compliance structures. You're being freed up for new opportunities." Freed up. Like I was a parking space that had been occupied too long. My face didn't change. I'd been yelled at by federal auditors, grilled by hostile investigators, and once told by a particularly cranky Texas regulator that my paperwork made her want to set fire to the entire banking industry. This was just amateur hour. "We're modernizing regulatory oversight through automation and vendor integration," Brandon continued, warming to his theme: scalable solutions, real-time dashboards, AI-enabled jurisdiction matching. "The future is now, Andy." I glanced at the stack of papers in front of Charlie. Performance reviews, probably still warm from the printer. All marked exceeds expectations, no doubt. Not that it mattered. This wasn't about performance. This was about Brandon needing to feel like a disruptor. "The compliance landscape is evolving rapidly," he went on, clearly rehearsing talking points he'd memorized. "We need dynamic, adaptive frameworks, not legacy processes rooted in the past. No offense, but your approach is very 20th century. Charlie shifted uncomfortably. He knew what I'd saved them from over the years, even if he'd never said it out loud. The Colorado crisis, the Arizona audit that could have shut down our Southwest operations. The time California tried to reclassify our lending structure, and I spent 72 straight hours finding the regulatory loophole that saved us $12 million in compliance costs. Nicole slid an envelope across the table like she was passing me a note in middle school. Her hand trembled slightly. This covers your severance package, COBRA continuation, and career transition resources. Who's taking over my filings? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. Brandon shrugged with practiced nonchalance. Legal's got template systems. We've onboarded 2 SaaS vendors with integrated dashboards. Everything's automated now. We'll figure it out. Templates. For a regulatory framework I'd built from scratch over 15 years, customized for 6 different state jurisdictions, calibrated to pass federal audits, and fine-tuned through relationships with dozens of individual regulators who knew me by name. What about the personal bonds? I pressed. Personal what? Brandon looked genuinely confused. The surety bonds. The $2 million in personal liability coverage that backs our multi-state licensing. They're tied to my individual credentials, not the company's. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly replaced by dismissive confidence. Legal will transfer those. It's just paperwork. I almost laughed. Almost. But I kept my expression neutral and made a mental note to check whether Brandon had ever actually read our compliance structure. Based on his answer, I was guessing no. Right, I said. And the Nevada renewal that's due in 6 days? The Florida audit response that needs my certified signature? The Arizona cryptocurrency reporting that I'm halfway through researching? Templates, Brandon repeated, like it was a magic word that solved everything. The beauty of automation is that it handles all that complexity without human error. Charlie cleared his throat. Andy, we appreciate everything you've done here. This isn't personal. It's just business evolution. I stood slowly, took one last look around the room. Charlie was already checking his phone. Brandon was practically glowing with victory. Nicole looked like she might throw up. Good luck. With the Series C, I said calmly. Hope the investors don't ask too many detailed questions about regulatory compliance. That got Brandon's attention. What do you mean? Nothing. I'm sure your templates will handle everything perfectly. I walked back to my desk, past the curious stares of coworkers who'd heard the rumors. Word travels fast in an open office, and by the time I reached my cubicle, half the floor knew I was packing up. The cardboard box was too small for 15 years of careful work, but most of what I did didn't take up physical space anyway. One coffee mug with a chip in the handle, a gift from Kevin after I'd helped him navigate his first regulatory audit. One framed photo from a compliance conference in Denver where I'd been recognized for outstanding regulatory partnership with the Colorado Banking Commission. 3 industry manuals they'd probably throw in a dumpster tomorrow. My personal logbook came last. I kept it separate from company systems, a detailed record of every filing, every deadline, every potential crisis I'd prevented. Before closing it, I flipped to the final page and wrote in neat block letters, termination without cause, regulatory continuity compromised, projected impact, catastrophic. I added the date, the names of everyone in that room, and a note about the various licensing deadlines they were about to miss. Then I closed the book and slipped it into my bag. Kevin appeared at my shoulder, looking stricken. Andy, this is insane. You literally saved this place from bankruptcy. Multiple times, I agreed. But that's ancient history now. Brandon's got templates. What happens to the Nevada renewal? I handed him my business card, the old one with my personal cell number. Call me in about 8 days. I might have some freelance consulting availability. He pocketed the card, understanding flickering in his eyes. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Heard you might be available for a conversation. Coffee tomorrow? D. Diana Cross. I'd been expecting that message for about 6 months now. I typed back, 2 p.m. works. Bring an attorney. The elevator doors closed, and I smiled for the first time all day. The office had no name on the door, just frosted glass and a security buzzer. You had to know it was there, tucked between a sushi place and a yoga studio downtown, the kind of location that whispered importance instead of shouting it. Diana Cross hadn't changed much since our last lunch 6 months ago. Still wore business suits like armor and carried herself like someone who'd survived hostile takeovers before breakfast. She'd been VP of risk at a major firm before going independent, building something lean and deadly beneath the radar. So, she said, glancing up from her laptop as I settled into the chair across from her desk, you finally burned it all down. I dropped my folder on her desk. 28 pages, but they hit like a sledgehammer. They burned it down, I corrected. I just stopped putting out their fires. She scanned the first few pages, whistled low. Jesus, Andy, you really built their entire foundation, didn't you? 15 years of it, every license, every bond, every regulatory relationship, all tied to my personal credentials. Diana tapped the folder. Nevada's 6 days overdue as of today. Florida audit response was due Monday. Arizona's crypto reporting deadline is Friday, and based on this note, you're the only one who understands the requirements. Brandon thinks legal has templates. She laughed, not surprised, just appreciative of the irony. Legal templates for state-specific regulatory bonds. That's like using a coloring book to perform brain surgery. We sat in comfortable silence while she reviewed more pages. Her office hummed with the quiet efficiency of servers and the soft tick of an analog clock. One of those startup ironies, pretending not to care about time while tracking every billable minute. The bonds are the real killer, she said finally. Personal surety coverage, non-transferable, tied to your individual license history. They can't just reassign those. Nope. Takes 6 to 9 months to get new bonds approved, assuming the applicant has sufficient experience and clean background checks. Brandon's got an MBA and 8 months of consulting work, so they're operating without coverage right now. As of yesterday afternoon, yes. Diana closed the folder, leaned back in her chair. I'm assuming this isn't a friendly heads-up call. Job interview, I said. With one condition. She raised an eyebrow. I want to be there when it all falls apart, front row seats to the detonation. That can be arranged. My compliance practice has been looking for a senior partner, someone with your institutional knowledge. I smiled. I built that house for 15 years. Time to hear the beams crack. We spent the next hour going over terms. Diana's operation was everything TechFlow wasn't: efficient, focused, built by people who understood that regulatory work was the central nervous system of financial services, not some bureaucratic afterthought. One more thing, she said as I prepared to leave, that Series C investor call they've got scheduled. Any chance they'll postpone it? Not a chance. Brandon's been bragging about it for weeks. Thinks it's his big moment to shine. Perfect. Nothing like an audience for a good implosion. Meanwhile, back at TechFlow, the first cracks were starting to show. Kevin Taylor sat in the break room, staring at his laptop screen with the expression of someone who'd just discovered a gas leak. The Nevada Banking Commission had sent an automated email. License renewal deadline missed. Operating authority suspended pending compliance review. Kevin had been trying to log into the renewal portal for 2 hours, but Andy's credentials were disabled and nobody else had access. He'd called legal. Linda Walsh had spent 30 minutes explaining why template documents wouldn't work for state-specific regulatory bonds. She'd called Brandon. Brandon had told him to figure it out and hung up. Now Kevin was looking at a form that required personal financial statements, professional references, and 3 years of compliance experience documentation. For Brandon Wells, who'd been in the job for 8 months and whose previous experience consisted of strategic consulting for his uncle's company. Kevin pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact Andy had given him, hesitated, then put the phone away. Not yet. Give them a chance to figure it out themselves first. But as he stared at the form, a horrible realization crept in. Andy hadn't just been doing a job. He'd been the only thing standing between TechFlow and regulatory collapse. And now he was gone. Brandon, meanwhile, was in his office creating a PowerPoint presentation titled Compliance 2.0, From Bureaucracy to Breakthrough. He had no idea that 3 state banking commissions were trying to reach him about missing filings. His assistant had been routing those calls to legal, and legal had been trying to reach Andy. The irony was perfect. Brandon was building slides about automated regulatory frameworks while the actual regulatory framework was collapsing in real time, one missed deadline at a time. Thursday's operations meeting was peak Brandon. He strutted in like a man who'd just solved world hunger, his half-zip pullover and designer jeans screaming disruption to an audience of increasingly concerned department heads. "All right, people," he announced, clapping his hands. "Let's keep this crisp. We're lean now. Compliance is automated. No more bloated legacy systems holding us back." Linda Walsh from legal looked like she'd been awake for 72 hours straight. "Brandon, we need to talk about the Nevada situation, and Florida, and Arizona. What about them? The licenses. They're complicated. Andy's personal bonds are non-transferable. We can't just file templates." Brandon waved dismissively. "Linda, This is exactly the kind of old-school thinking we're moving past. Compliance is becoming a technology problem, not a people problem. But the regulators are calling. They want to speak with Andy specifically. Some of them have worked with him for years, so we'll introduce them to our new systems. Change is hard, but that's why we get paid the big bucks. Kevin, sitting in the corner, pulled out his phone again. This time he didn't hesitate. Andy? It's Kevin. You might want to check the news tomorrow. I think Nevada just suspended our operating authority. The call lasted exactly 47 seconds. When Kevin hung up, he quietly started updating his resume. By Friday afternoon, 3 state banking commissions had sent certified letters demanding immediate compliance reviews. Jason Stone, the CFO, was fielding increasingly aggressive calls from auditors who couldn't reach their primary contact. The company's automated systems were generating error reports that nobody understood. Brandon, oblivious, was preparing for Monday's investor call, certain it would be his moment of triumph. Andy Patterson was reviewing contract terms with Diana Cross, counting down the hours until his former colleagues discovered just how much trouble they were really in. Monday's investor call was scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific, which made it Tuesday morning in Singapore. Perfect timing for Eliza Tan and her team to be sharp, caffeinated, and ready to dissect every detail of TechFlow's regulatory compliance structure. The conference room looked like it belonged in a tech thriller. Floor-to-ceiling windows, matte black fixtures, air that smelled vaguely of ambition, and industrial-grade disinfectant. A 40-foot monitor dominated one wall, split between Brandon's PowerPoint presentation and a crystal-clear feed from Singapore, where the investment team sat like poker masters behind silver MacBooks. I was supposed to be at Diana's office, reviewing new client contracts. Instead, I was sitting in my car across the street, watching through TechFlow's windows with the satisfaction of a man who'd planted a garden and was finally ready to harvest. Brandon stood at the head of the conference table, arms spread wide like he was conducting an orchestra. And that's why our expansion into regulated lending represents not just growth, but inevitability. We've modernized every aspect of our compliance infrastructure. The presentation behind him showed graphs that curved skyward like prayers to venture capital gods. Charlie sat 3 chairs down, checking notes he'd clearly seen for the first time in the elevator. Jason Stone, the CFO, had the look of a man who'd just realized he was standing in quicksand. Eliza Tan nodded politely from the screen. She didn't speak immediately, letting the pause stretch just long enough to remind everyone who controlled the $750 million checkbook. Thank you, Mr. Wells. Very comprehensive. Her tone was perfectly neutral, which, in investment circles, was usually a bad sign. Before we proceed with final due diligence, I have some clarifications. Brandon beamed like a game show host. Of course. Fire away. Our compliance team reviewed your regulatory structure over the weekend. Is it accurate that your multi-state operating authority was held under Andrew Patterson's personal bonds? The smallest twitch in Brandon's eye. Jason turned slowly toward Linda Walsh in legal, then back to Eliza. Andy transitioned out of the organization last week, Charlie said carefully, each word examined for legal liability before release. I see. And who currently holds those regulatory bonds? Silence hit the room like a toxic gas leak. Invisible but deadly. The bonds in question were personal specific, Linda spoke finally, her voice tight with exhaustion. They're non-transferable without individual reapplication through each state authority. Eliza frowned slightly, made a note. To confirm, you currently operate without active regulatory bonds in Nevada, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, and Delaware? Brandon jumped in, trying to laugh it away. Well, our systems are fully operational. The automation handles all compliance monitoring. This is more of a administrative transition. A man in a gray suit leaned forward on the Singapore side, whispered something urgent to Eliza. She nodded once, her expression cooling several degrees. Mr. Wells, without proper bond authority, your operations exist in significant legal gray areas. Our legal team has confirmed that Nevada suspended your operating license last Thursday. Florida initiated compliance proceedings Friday morning. This isn't administrative, it's existential. The temperature in the room dropped like someone had opened a freezer. We've initiated efforts to secure new signatories. Charlie cleared his throat desperately. It's in process. And the timeline for that process? Another whisper from Singapore. Eliza's tone remained calm, but steel crept into her words. Our analysis suggests 6 to 9 months for proper credentialing, assuming qualified applicants. Meanwhile, you're operating across state lines without legal authority. Brandon's face had gone the color of old newspaper. But our vendor integration, the automated compliance dashboards. Mr. Wells, Eliza interrupted gently, dashboards don't replace regulatory bonds. They don't establish legal authority. They certainly don't satisfy federal auditing requirements. That's when I decided it was time. I walked into the TechFlow lobby, took the elevator to the 12th floor, and strolled into the conference room like I owned the place, which, in a regulatory sense, I kind of did. Sorry I'm late, I announced to the stunned room. Traffic was murder. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to breathe air. Andy, what are you doing here? I placed a manila folder on the conference table and turned to address the camera. Ms. Tan, I'm Andrew Patterson. I believe you've been asking about me. Eliza's expression shifted to something approaching relief. Mr. Patterson. Yes, we've been trying to understand the transition of regulatory authority. There wasn't one, I said simply. When TechFlow terminated my employment last Tuesday, all personal bonds and regulatory relationships terminated with me. As of last Thursday, they've been operating without legal authority in 6 states. I opened the folder, slid documents across the table. These are transfer notifications I filed Friday afternoon. All regulatory bonds and licensing authority have been moved to Patterson Compliance Solutions, LLC, effective immediately. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling. However, I continued, looking directly at the camera, I'd be happy to discuss a consulting arrangement for your compliance needs, Ms. Tan. My firm specializes in exactly the kind of multi-jurisdictional regulatory frameworks your investment requires. Eliza smiled for the first time in the entire call. That would be very welcome, Mr. Patterson. Perhaps we could schedule a separate conversation. I'll have my assistant call yours this afternoon. Brandon found his voice finally. Andy, you can't just... We can work this out. Come back. Name your price. I turned to him with the expression of a man who'd been insulted by a mosquito. Brandon, you told me compliance was obsolete, that templates would handle everything, that AI made my expertise irrelevant. I shrugged. So handle it with templates. The Singapore screen flickered, and Eliza was closing her files. We'll be in touch, Mr. Patterson. As for the current investment discussions, she looked directly at Charlie. I'm afraid we'll need to table those pending resolution of these regulatory issues. The screen went dark. Nobody moved. Brandon stared at the folder like it contained his death warrant. Charlie looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Jason was already pulling out his phone, probably calling their attorney. I picked up my folder, headed for the door. Kevin, I called to the intern sitting wide-eyed in the corner. My offer stands if you're interested in working for a properly licensed compliance firm. As I walked out, I could hear Brandon's voice rising to panic pitch behind me. This is insane. We can fix this. We can... The elevator doors closed on his protestations. 3 weeks later, Diana and I were reviewing contracts for our 6th new client. TechFlow Financial had ceased operations in 5 states and was facing $2.3 million in regulatory fines. Brandon was exploring new opportunities, which seemed to involve a lot of LinkedIn posts about entrepreneurial resilience. Charlie had called twice, offering everything from equity to his firstborn child. I'd let those calls go to voicemail. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or explosive. Sometimes it's just walking away with what you built and letting the people who didn't appreciate it discover what they actually lost. These days, Patterson Compliance Solutions answers our phone within 1 business hour, just like our business cards promise, and we mean it.